Good morning. It's a beautiful spring, early spring Monday morning in Finland. I am often inspired in the morning to think about the truth, the essential nature of our reality. Now, the body mind feels it's so full of light that merely thinking about the truth will no longer suffice. I am compelled to talk about the truth and share my understanding with the world. A bit earlier, I contemplated about my teaching and the different spiritual traditions. I only know the Vedantic tradition, I would say, quite well, but I've never read Bhagavad Gita, or I haven't even read the Bible really. I am familiar with these books by the references made by the teachers I have followed. But the yoga of understanding, Jnana Yoga, is the closest tradition that I have followed. However, it became clear to me that my teaching, what I really know, I feel well enough to talk about, could be called living presence. For me, the nondual understanding joins effortlessly the ordinary tasks and activities of life. I often dance and sing alone when doing some work in the kitchen or cooking. Talking with different kinds of people. I have a large variety in friends. I do not just hang out with spiritual people. That would feel somehow limited to me. My wife isn't really that interested about non-duality, although she is enjoying that I'm enjoying it. So, what is the essential teaching of this living presence? It is simply this: nothing on this planet needs a person. This may sound like a strange statement, if especially you are new to non-duality. Almost everybody assumes, one way or another, that what lies behind the noun I is the person, the body, its history, mind and its thoughts, belief systems. We could make a slightly unfair generalization and say that currently unhappiness in the world is treated in two different ways: trying to fix the brain or trying to fix the person. The efficacy and evaluation of these two methods I leave to you. But there is a third possibility: recognizing that we are neither the brain or the person, but the awareness, consciousness in which both appear. I remember when I first read Nisargadatta, a famous Indian sage known for his bad habits like chain smoking and meat eating. But he was also a great source of wisdom and love. It was perhaps 2016 when I first read the I Am That, and I was quite shocked that for him it seemed to be a living reality, that none of us was either born nor would die. He would point to this fact with a sense of ease and power that, although it was a very strange idea for me at the time, I also somehow felt very attracted to it. What Nisargadatta was pointing at is that the reality of the world and the universe is beyond space and time. Space and time are not fundamental in reality. The fundamental reality owns space-time, so to speak. And this fundamental reality is not separate from our being, for it is infinite, and that is why it encompasses all. So if you find the notion of universal consciousness or infinite being somehow too much, ask yourself, is infinity impossible? If you think that infinity is possible, then if you are not infinite at the deepest level, the trees are not part of that infinity, thoughts are not part of that infinity, planets are not part of that infinity. What is left for infinity? It is, if there is infinity, it has to be everything. So the far trickier part is how all this relates to consciousness and awareness. Many of the world's greatest thinkers have come to the conclusion that we must accept consciousness as the fundamental fact of reality, because it is the direct experience of everyone, without which no experience is possible. So if we state that there is the fundamental reality of the universe is matter, which exists outside consciousness, that can never be verified. We have just locked ourselves into a model of reality that can never be experientially proven or experienced. which is rather stupid. Why is it rather stupid? Well, first of all, I do not mean to imply that someone who believes the matter to be the fundamental reality of universe is stupid. I want to merely point out that accepting a model of reality that can never be directly experienced is not a very good option. It's not a very good option because what we humans truly want is to be at peace, feel joy, feel love, feel a sense of purpose, a sense of meaning, have artistic moments, express ourselves, express the love and artistry we feel. And if we lock ourselves into a worldview that has the word random at everything we cannot explain and postulates that consciousness is derived from matter and simultaneously making this view impossible to experience because of its inherent problems. We've thrown away the key to happiness with a mental abstraction. Of course, we do not realize we do this. It's not normal to have a conversation about the model of reality. It sounds like some deep abstract notion, but nothing could be further from the truth. It is absolutely vital to understand that we all have a model of reality and it impacts deeply how we perceive the world, how we perceive our thoughts, feelings, bodily sensations. So consciousness is our best starting point for reality or the examination of reality. Because although everything could be a dream, who knows? I mean, when we sleep and we dream that we are, I don't know, we have a multi-million-dollar yacht and we are, you know, swimming on a paradise island. We do not usually in the dream know it to be a dream. Everything seems real, the walls in the ship, sand on the beach, mojito on the lips. And then we wake up and we say, no, okay, that was all mind stuff. So who knows? Who knows? Maybe the waking state is a similar kind of dream. But we don't really even need to know that. Because the perceiving consciousness, whether it is perceiving the waking world and the body as we know it, the body and the world always appear together, or one of the dream states, or whether that consciousness is perceiving the absence of content, it is still perceiving. We usually accept, or we do not even think about, the possibility that consciousness could be always there because it seems so obvious that, for example, during deep sleep it is lost. There exists a possibility, if you are truly open, to ask yourselves this question when you wake up, for example, in the morning. Was my being, the fact of being, lost during deep sleep? And then maybe your being responds in a way that is very difficult to formulate in words, but it's for the sake of the story. Let's say that you feel the truth inside you that your being was never interrupted by any of the dream or deep sleep states. Now let this sink in. And then ask yourself, who is aware of that? For you to feel the truth that being was never lost in your deep sleep, something must recognize this fact. Now there are people who are much better acquainted with the science aspect of consciousness than I am. But as a pragmatic pointer, I feel there is one particular set of evidence that completely destroys materialism. And that is the tens of thousands of documented cases of people whose bodies have been practically dead very little activity anywhere in the body. Heart has stopped, all that jazz. They've been dead for 10 minutes or something. Boom, they come back to life. And I even read about one case where the guy was like angry at the doctors who resuscitated him. He was like, no, I was just with my family, and everything, all the family members who were long gone, they were there, and oh, it was such bliss. So answer me this. If consciousness originates from the brain activity, why are there tens of thousands of people with documented cases having all sorts of life-altering experiences, deepest, richest experiences of their lives, experienced in consciousness while their body was basically dead? In the scientific rational realm, I mean, that is, to me, that is, you cannot by any invented method actually explain that. But so that's why consciousness should be considered fundamental. And I've given you just a couple of things to think about. And of course, the big question, what does this have to do with happiness? I would say in an authentic spiritual exploration, or maybe I should call it self-investigation, because the word spiritual conjures so many esoteric images. So I think in an authentic and wise self-investigation, there are two major areas to investigate. One, consciousness and the nature of reality, as we just covered. And the other is happiness, joy, peace, whatever you want to call it. So, my first glimpse of this deep joy came at a time when I had lost all my money and I had to go to a social welfare office, because I live in Finland, so you don't have to rob anyone if you run out of money. So I went to the social welfare office and I was accompanied by the greatest feeling of shame I've ever felt. It seemed like a total failure. And there, feeling like a total failure, I sat and watched the people around me. And the thought came to me, now I am nothing. Suddenly this bubbling joy opened up in my chest, and the entire situation was completely transformed. From the feeling of greatest shame, I was instantaneously transported to a feeling of deep joy and laughter. I loved being nothing. And I remember thinking about why don't people realize this? Why is it so awesome to be a nobody? Oh my God, this is absolutely fantastic. So that glimpse ended. I returned to the world of suffering. But the seed of investigation was born. The previous happiness hypothesis had been irreversibly damaged. What do I mean by the happiness hypothesis? Well, we all have a series of beliefs that's what we need in order to be happy. It makes sense. It takes time to get a college degree, it takes time to become a parent, build a house, become a professional. Everything takes time. So it isn't really that surprising that my previous happiness hypothesis also included the idea that happiness must be one of these things that take time. But in that moment, in that social welfare office, gone the previous happiness hypothesis. The joy I felt was so real, so adamant, that as someone who is open and curious, likes to think about things, I had to put the previous theory into the trash bin. About a year from that experience, I got fired from a job. And the next day, now there was this deep, awesome silence. Absolutely profound. I walked in the city I was living at the time, and I was incredibly impressed by everything. Everything seemed like it had this sort of shining inside it. And again, at a point of failure, I felt the deepest love and connection I had ever felt. And also, it was then that I made a decision. I have to really look into this spirituality stuff. This experience is so powerful. I mean, I can't ignore it. I mean, I don't know anything about spirituality or very little about religions, but I have to look into this. And look into it, I did. I was obsessed for many years with spiritual books and teachings, Ramana Maharshi, Nisargadatta Maharaj, Eckhart Tolle, Byron Katie, and closer to where I am now, I started following Rupert Spira. And Rupert mentioned in one of his videos that he was taught by someone called Francis Lucille. And I was finally, you could say, invited to go see Francis in Barcelona. That completely changed the trajectory I was at. I was building a marketing business, I was quite happy doing it. After meeting Francis, that I would only do that was out of the question, like instantly. I didn't feel or expect that I would be sharing my non-dual understanding at this age of 39. But meeting Francis, it was completely irrelevant what I believed. I felt this longing, this loving longing to share my understanding with a force that was, there's no question of ignoring it. So back to the issue of happiness. I felt I wanted to share something of my personal history and path. But the main point, happiness, if it isn't the result of achieving things or going to a nice vacation or riding a bike or watching your child play, why is it that quite often in those moments we feel such joy? It is because in that moment we want nothing else. So how is this different from believing that the happiness comes from the object, if that object is still related to happiness? Well, it's a huge difference, because if the happiness isn't dependent or doesn't come from the object, but rather reveals the happiness you are when you no longer want anything else, then it is conceivable that happiness can become your state of being, provided you want nothing else but the present moment. So how could this, Byron Katie has a book called Loving What Is. I think that sums it up perfectly. How could loving what is become our state of being or our natural experience? It is only possible if you experience firsthand for yourself that the reality of the universe is what we could call love. It is not a neutral dark place, but a unified whole, governed by an intelligence so vast the human mind cannot even comprehend the least bit of it. It's like Albert Einstein said when he was reflecting on the existence of God, and he felt most attuned with the God of Baruch Spinoza, a great Renaissance man who realized the nondual truth, although he used different words. So Einstein said, I feel like a little child who is able to read the first row, some of the books of the first row in a vast library. So that's how one of the most intelligent individuals in human history felt about their knowledge. So the happiness as a state of being, or simply happiness as being, is perhaps a better pointer to it, is only possible if you realize that the reality of the universe is love, and you are that reality. You are not separate from it. Another way of looking at this is you realize that if you look for purpose and meaning of life on the level of form, you will always be dissatisfied. Because on the level of form, everything decays and is destroyed. No, there are life forms that only live for a few seconds before a bigger life form eats them up. I mean, with the human mind and perspective, this is a brutal world. Unless we are something eternal that is not destroyed or affected by the world of form. Then this means that everything, that all the bad outcomes in your life are part of this intelligence unfolding and pointing you, guiding you back to yourself. And you are at home, at ease in your being. And then everything changes. There is no need to believe me or the things I say. But if you consider this teaching and it resonates with you, it might be wise to have a preliminary trust in someone who seems quite happy until you can verify these things yourself. Remember, true trust comes from a different place than identifying with belief systems. So, have the courage to examine your own reality. No one else can do it for you. Thank you. Have a lovely day and hopefully a lovely week. Goodbye.